This. Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Louis B. Free Radio Show, Brain Food from the Heartland. Truly an honor to have on the author of Map of Hope and Sorrow, Stories of Refugees Trapped in Greece. And I have Professor Helen Benedict on. Good morning to you.
Morning.
The more I read about you, the more interested I am. So how about telling us a bit about your background, if you would?
Sure. Well, I was born in London, England, of American parents. So I'm a dual citizen, which has been very useful. And my father was an anthropologist. So as a child, I got to live in a lot of different places, including islands in the Indian Ocean at a time, Mauritius and Seychelles, at a time when they were still British colonies and extremely poor, which I think had a profound effect on me, even though I was very small, and is related to the work I do now, because it gave me a kind of a passion, if you like, about injustice and the marginalized and the oppression by the powerful of the powerless. So that's been my subject matter a lot in both my novels and my journalism.
So a little bit more about that, if you would, that path. That's interesting.
Yeah.
If you don't mind.
Well, those islands were very grueling at the time. I mean, there was a lot of terrible disease. So I remember seeing people with leprosy and elephantiasis, and children with distended stomachs because they had worms. A lot of drunks, like they would just fall down in the street. They would get drunk on palm wine because the people of those islands were being held down by the colonial system so that they couldn't get anywhere in their lives, and it just created a kind of hopelessness and despair. And I didn't understand all that as a little child, but I certainly understood that there I was on these tropical islands that were extraordinarily beautiful, some of the most beautiful spots in the whole world. And I was indifferent to that because that's not the sort of thing you pay attention to when you're 8 years old, 5 years old. But you do notice when children your own age are starving around you or are dazed looking with red eyes and these swollen stomachs. That's something I remember very vividly. And the people who lived on these islands were a mix of African and Indian and Arab ancestry, with some European thrown in as well, because they had been, these are all the people who'd emigrated there. It's a long history I won't go into now, but it was very interesting. I went back later and I wrote a novel set in the Seychelles called The Edge of Eden, set around 1960, when it was still a colony. Now it's independent and doing better, much better. But I do think that had a lot to do with it. And then when we moved to Berkeley when I was a teenager. So I went from an all-girls, very posh school in London to Berkeley High School in 1967.
What was that like?
It was fantastic. It was like being given wings. And it was a very exciting time. Black Panthers were rising. Stokely Carmichael came and talked to our school. My history class started with the autobiography of Malcolm X. So I leapt from James II in England. I was learning James II because we learned the royalty in order and historical order. And suddenly I was with Malcolm X and the Vietnam War protests. And it was just fabulous, life-changing for me. It just fit. I realized this is where I belong, not in England. So I did go back for university and for a few years, but I've been in this country now since 1978. And I went to UC Berkeley's graduate school of journalism and worked in a local paper in the Bay Area. So I'm now in San Francisco, even though I live in New York, but just for the moment. And it's a nice feeling to be back in my old stomping grounds.
So I've got to ask you, and I know this is pretty off the wall, but Marmite, love it or hate it? Marmite, or did you maybe?
Oh, Marmite,
Yeah,
love it.
love. Yay! Wait, I'm going to show you. No one's going to see, but I've got my
Yeah, I mean
here.
the jar alone, but you have to be weaned onto that stuff to like it because it's so strong.
It is, and again I love it. It's interesting always when I have somebody from the UK. I always like to ask because my bad preconceived notion was, well, if you're from the UK, you must like Marmite, and which was really dumb. And that was years ago. It's like, really, does everybody in the United States? Yet I have found you either love it or hate it.
Right.
That's what I find. There's no in between. You've written many books. Your new book is Map of Hope and Sorrow, Stories of Refugees Trapped in Greece. If you don't mind, the tipping point. Well, first let's talk a little bit about how you met your co-author, Eyad. I think that's
Yes.
interesting.
Okay. So yeah, in 2018, in the summer, I went to the island of Samos, in the northern Aegean, the Greek island, because I knew it had a refugee camp there. And all the other journalists and writers were going to the island of Lesbos. And everyone was hearing about the terrible camp in Lesbos, but nobody was hearing about Samos. So I went to that one. Because I was writing a novel at the time. I'd written a lot about the aftermath of the Iraq War. I had gotten to know Iraqi refugees in the US. And I realized that a lot of Iraqi refugees from the Iraq War, our war, had fled to Damascus only to be displaced all over again when the Syrian war started. And I was hoping to meet some people maybe who'd been displaced twice, because I thought that was a very interesting and heartbreaking story to follow. So my second day in Samos, I wandered into a stationery shop to buy a map. And there was a young man standing there asking for buying something with really exquisitely polite English. And he just seemed so gentle and well-mannered. And I just had a feeling that I would like him. So I just went up to him and invited him for coffee. And he looked a little surprised, but he said he couldn't meet me then. But I said, could you meet me the next morning? Because I'm going to the camp. I have an appointment with the camp manager inside the refugee camp, which is set just above a little town called Vafi on the island. And he said, yes, he would meet me there. So the next morning I went for my appointment, and I was the camp manager. It's taken me, by the way, 3 months to get that appointment. Journalists were not allowed in the camp. So I'd gone as a novelist doing research, kind of, so she didn't think I was going to write about the camp, a promise I broke. And there he was with his friend Hasan. And I recount this in the book. The first thing he said is, hello, how are you? This is my friend Hasan. He is a man without hope. So of course my curiosity lit up, and I said, can we talk? Hasan didn't speak English at the time, but he was a fellow Syrian. So we went up the hill and we sat out of the sight of the police under an olive tree, surrounded by litter and a mess, because the camp was so overcrowded and people were sprawled all over the place and living in tents and homemade shelters. And we began to talk, and Eyad was my interpreter. And they were friends, both Syrians. And he just began to bring me more people to interview and act as my interpreter, because I stayed for 5 weeks that first visit. And we met almost every day and spent hours and hours and hours together, taking walks, having coffee, talking to people, hearing about their lives in the camp. And that's how we started off. There was one other element too, which is that he'd written an essay about his own flight from Syria, which his lawyer thought would be useful for his asylum case. So he asked me to read it over and check the translation into English. And when I read it, I saw that it was really beautiful, really moving. So I asked him if I could try and get it published. He said yes, and I sold it to Slate magazine, who made it their cover story, which was really thrilling for Eyad. He was only 23 when I met him.
Wow.
He always wanted to be a writer. He'd been writing for himself already for a long time. And this was his first publication, so it was terribly exciting for both of us. And as we were talking together, I saw that people just opened up to him, that he had a natural gift as an interviewer, and including women, just totally trusted him. So we kept meeting. I kept going back to Greece. We were hanging out as friends, and we were also interviewing people. And then COVID came and stopped me going back, because we had this whole trip planned. And I thought, you know, you're a gifted interviewer and a beautiful writer. You're in Greece. Why don't you interview Arabic speakers? I'll interview English and French speakers over WhatsApp until I can get back there in person, and we'll be co-authors. And that's how it all came about.
That's wonderful. And you just had a feeling when you saw him. I love that. They're just like a intuitive
Yeah.
sense
And
that
he had the same
like this
thing
guy.
about me. He had the same thing about me. I said, what did you think of this strange woman accosting you, inviting you for coffee, this strange older woman? And he said, I just really liked your smile. And we don't get smiled at very much, because there's a lot of hostility has grown up among the locals. They started off being very welcoming to the refugees, but then as more and more refugees got trapped in the island because of new policies that had been put in by the EU and Greece, the numbers became overwhelming, and to the locals, at least that's how they saw it, and hostility grew. And so it was just being smiled at and welcomed, and not treated as something inferior or something subhuman was different. That's
I don't even know how to describe it, like meant to be or what. I love that you both picked up on each other, on the warmth and the I'm going to say the vibe, each other's vibe, I guess.
Yeah,
so
it was like that.
And you
and
also
we're still very close.
yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And I saw in the dedication that you said for Eyad, Hasan, and Ali, who began it all, and for the refugees everywhere and the people who welcome them. That's very, 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 very beautiful. When you were doing the interviews, I can't even imagine how difficult it was. Obviously, they experienced it, but to hear these horror stories had to be, obviously you're somebody that feels deeply, when you talk about meeting. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, it's very humbling, and I don't tend to be the kind of person who thinks much about how I'm feeling about it, because whatever I'm going through is nothing compared to what they've gone through, and it feels kind of arrogant and ridiculous to worry about that. But I will say that it's not, even though some of their stories are really hair-raising and upsetting, the people themselves are not. I was so moved and encouraged by the spirit of everyone I met, the determination to plow through all these difficulties, to overcome them, and to make a new life, to help each other, if they had children, to make a new life for their children. They could not go home. Their homes were impossible. Their homes meant death, or imprisonment, torture, death, or all three. So that kind of human determination was very encouraging for me. And it counterbalanced the horror and sadness of their stories. Although certainly there were moments when it was just terribly, terribly sad. But we also laughed a lot. We made jokes. We told silly stories, talked about food, talked about language, talked about, I mean, we all love, especially Eyad and I really love talking about comparing Arabic phrases with the English phrases and the way they overlap and their origins. And, just it's endlessly fascinating language and when you face translation. But I interviewed all the people in the book. We both did for so many years, so many times, so many hours, much of it during COVID, when everybody had a lot of time to talk, which was sort of to my advantage because you couldn't go anywhere or do anything, that
Good
they
point.
became more like friends than sources.
That's interesting. Again, I get it that you didn't personally experience it, but if you've got, empathy, it's still going to, it was work, obviously it was impacted them. They lived through it, but to hear some of those had to be difficult because obviously you've got a lot of feeling and empathy. When you think about putting it together, and I'm jumping all around, Professor, I hope you don't mind my chaos, but the putting it together, the book together and putting it out is always fascinates me to be published. And what's that? I know you've done this many, 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 many times. You've written many, many books. What's that experience like? It's like, okay, I've written it now. Take it and put it to the world.
I'm a bit of a ham. So I love giving readings and I love doing interviews. And I'm a teacher, so to me it's not very different from being in the classroom. So I'm very comfortable with that, very at home with that. The nerve-wracking thing is waiting for reviews or hoping you can get any reviews these days, because book reviews, are shriveling all over. So that's really rough. But this is the first time I've ever co-authored a book, and it's the first time we've ever kind of gone on the road, as it were, with somebody else. And Eyad and I have done quite a lot of virtual events together. And I went to Iceland in the summer to do things in person with him. And it's been really fun doing that because we can talk about it afterwards, we can bounce off each other, ask each other questions, tell our different sides and views of things, and there's a kind of companionship. It's much less lonely than when you're doing it on your own. So I've found that an absolute delight.
Tell me more about Iceland and if you will.
So after struggling for 5 years in Greece just to get asylum and then to get the ID papers and get the passport, the bureaucracy is so slow for refugees there. It's criminal. Meanwhile, they can't go to school. It's really hard to work. So they're kind of trapped and paralyzed in this limbo, which is really hard when you're young. I mean, Eyad was in his second year of law school when he had to flee because of the war, and his education just ground to a halt for years. Finally, the family figured out that probably the last friendly country left in Europe was Iceland. So they went to Iceland and threw themselves on the mercy of the police and said, we request asylum. And Iceland was welcoming. It was night and day compared to the way they'd been treated in Greece. So long story short, his whole family, he has a very big family, he's one of 10 siblings, they all live in Iceland now, and the younger ones are in school and they've learned to speak Icelandic. He's about to go to journalism school. So that's wonderful. But that's why I went to Iceland, because he didn't have the freedom passport yet to leave. And he still can't come here. He has a refugee passport, which allows him to go to some countries in Europe, but nowhere else. Certainly not the UK since Brexit, and not here. And something amazing happened in Iceland, which is just before I got there, the right-wing faction of the government, it's a coalition government. And so there's a very progressive side, and then there's a very unprogressive side, announced that they were going to round up 300 refugees, which is almost all the refugees there, and send them back to Greece. These are people who had taken all kinds of risks to get out of Greece and spent all their money, saved and spent and borrowed to get out of Greece. And our book is, shows how awful Greece is to refugees. So we suddenly became the hot thing. And we were on television, and there was a big magazine spread about us, which of course we couldn't read because it was in Icelandic. And we were on panels with members of parliament, and the opposition, the people who wanted to stop this deportation, were able to use our book as part of their argument. And they won. And those 300 people were not deported. So that felt amazingly good. And that was just at the very beginning of the life of this book, because it came out in Europe before it came out here.
That's, again, wonderful feeling knowing that the book was used in that and succeeded. Let's talk about, I don't know if you want to pick one of the people, but or me, or you tell me. Do you want, you pick, you wrote it, you did the interviews. I know we can't go through them all, but.
No, I will just mention, since there are only 5 of them, where they're from, because we did want a range of people. So we have a young Syrian man. We have a Syrian woman in her 40s who was pregnant and alone when she arrived in Greece. We have a young woman from Afghanistan who's only 21 when I met her, Mursal, and a 22-year-old man called Evans from Nigeria, who's gay and had to flee because of the homophobic laws in Nigeria. He was caught with his partner, and if he stayed, he would have been imprisoned by now, if not killed beforehand. And then a political refugee from Cameroon who is 35. So those are the 5 people we concentrate on, and then there's a chapter about women. Maybe I'll talk about Evans a bit, because I think this is something that people don't know a lot about this, which is there are between 69 and 71, it changes a bit from year to year, countries in the world that criminalize LGBTQ people and activities, and many of them also criminalize anyone who supports them. So you can't run a support group or a clinic or anything like that without being arrested. And I met several young men, both Muslims and Christians, from some of these countries in Africa, namely Sierra Leone, Nigeria, and Gambia, who had been caught with their partners. And 2 of them had actually been tortured by their own parents. This was one of the stories I found hardest. As a parent myself, I could not believe that parents would do this kind of thing to their own children. But their cultural and religious beliefs against it was so strong. The homophobia is so strong that they sort of regard you as having been possessed by the devil, so that they have to beat it out of you. So in Evans's case, this happened to him, and his mother did that, had him held down and hurt him a lot, really badly, and then threw him out and disowned him when he was 17. So he had to make his way on his own at 17. But Evans is a talented dancer, and he joined a dance troupe. He was just working at a garage, and he became a professional dancer in Nigeria, and was making a living as a dancer, doing a mix of different kinds of African dances, traditional dances, and kind of updated with some hip hop mix, and which he absolutely loved. And he met his partner among the dancers, and they were deeply in love for 2 years, and then they got caught by neighbors who beat them up. And Evans and they had cutlasses, not just their fists or sticks. They had giant knives. Evans jumped out of a window and managed to escape. I'm not going to tell the whole story, because I want people to read the book for the story.
Sure. No, yes, of course.
But he made his way all the way from Nigeria to Greece by himself, with many a misadventure on the way, and some really, really horrific things. He survived them all. And by the time I met him, he was living in Greece, unable in a tent, on Samos, unable to trust anybody at all and unable to be out. Because one of the ironies about being an LGBTQ refugee is that you may end up with a lot of people from your own country who are refugees for other reasons. Maybe they're political refugees mostly, but hold the same homophobic attitudes as the culture does at home. So, they find that they're no safer among their fellow refugees than they were at home, even though Greece doesn't mind you being gay, but but within the camp. And I met one young man who had to flee the camp. He had to flee his fellow refugees, having already fled Sierra Leone. So it's quite extraordinary. And I met these people because there was a volunteer at the camp who's gay himself, and he'd started a secret LGBTQ support group. And it had to be secret because the lesbians and gay people and trans people there were in so much danger from other refugees. And they met in secret, and I happened to be there when they had their first in-person meeting since COVID. So there were 28 of us behind locked doors having a secret meeting. That's how dangerous it was for them. And it was very moving because so many of them came from countries where there were no support groups because it was illegal and too dangerous to have support groups. So for the first time, they were meeting each other openly and not having to hide. It was a really amazing moment.
Again, in some of the things in Evans, first, of course, at the beginning, a lot of people here, when they see me, they shout haram. It means forbidden in Arabic. And one of the other, there's a lot of things I've marked up in the book. And of course, folks, that book is Map of Hope and Sorrow, Stories of Refugees Trapped in Greece. When he says, now I am not talking to my mother or brother because of the way they treated me. And I'm sorry, I tear up a little bit when I think unconscionable. That's not the word. It's much, I don't know. There's no word to describe that. When you say, and you understand that the other refugees had the same beliefs, I would have liked to have thought that, okay, we're all here together now. We've got, but that's not the case, which was, understand. Yeah.
It can be. And again, I don't want to, some people, a lot of people really help each other. A lot of the refugees help each other. It's just a lot more difficult if you're gay or a lesbian and people know it, because you can't just drop something, a belief that's been inculcated, into you since you were born. You can't just drop it within a month of arriving in the West. Think how much homophobia we still have in the West. Listen to the Republicans. It's everywhere.
Not to get political.
Yeah. So, so it's some Republicans, not all, of course, but it's just really hard for them. But they were finding each other, and they had a community together, and that was new for a lot of them. They'd never had that before. So that was the upside of it.
Sure. Yeah. Again, Professor, in this so-called modern day, that still exists, and that people wouldn't. Now it sound maybe too critical for people that had to leave a country and resort somewhere else. But I just think about, it's like, you know what? I can't be that way to this person. We're all here together. We've all got that commonality. It's very, very difficult reading.
Yeah. I will say that, I met a lot of people who came from homophobic cultures who did not hold those views themselves as well. So It wasn't always, not everybody was against them, but enough for them for Evans, for example, to never feel safe.
That's again, an incredible read, Map of Hope and Sorrow, stories of refugees trapped in Greece. I know we're not doing the book. The book is, I should know how many pages, 300 pages plus. So obviously in this brief period, I want people to read it as you want people to read it. But Mursal, I'm glad that I'm a refugee. It made me powerful.
Yeah.
That at the beginning of the chapter, you've got quotes. And that was, what a way of looking at it. It's like,
Yeah.
I know the old saying, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. Well, that's not always the case.
Right.
But yet to have that, to look at it that way, I thought was really, really, their insight, the insight, I guess is what I want to say, Professor.
She's only 21, incredibly wise.
Yeah.
And she makes a really good point with that, because refugees go through so much to leave their countries and to take that journey. I mean, she and her family, her little sisters, mother and father, walked for weeks over mountains in just flimsy and snowy, rocky, dangerous mountains between Iran and Turkey. She walked for so much, she told me that her feet swelled to twice their size. Sleeping on the ground, no shelter, didn't eat often for days on end. I mean, they went through amazing struggles to reach safety, to escape the Taliban. So you bet it makes that, you discover the strength you have in you and you build it. I mean, it takes a certain kind of person to be able to do that, a person with a great deal of drive and gumption and determination. And I do think that refugees are among the best of our humankind, because they have this quality, and she expresses it very well. And in the face of so much prejudice against refugees and so much demonization that's going on now, she wants to say loud and clear, I'm proud of being a refugee. And she does say that. I'm proud of what I've endured and gone through, and I'm going to keep fighting. And I want you to realize, as she puts it, I'm just like you. We are just people. So she has this very eloquent plea in the back of her chapter about, please stop hating us.
Yeah.
We just don't want to live under bombs. We just want a life where we can have our dreams and keep our children safe, and become something, do something useful with our lives, do something useful for the country that we live in. That's all we want. We don't want to come here and change your culture or steal your jobs or all those other things that are said. That's not what we're about at all. We want to integrate. We want to contribute.
Part of yeah.
Yeah.
Part of that. Wonderful messages in the book. Let's talk about availability, if you will, of Map of Hope and Sorrow, if you would.
Yeah, well, it should be in, if it isn't in your local bookshop, they can order it because it's there available, or you can.
Everywhere online. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
And please, you can also order it from the various online stores.
Amazon, etc. Yeah.
Amazon, Barnes and Noble. But it is, or indie. There's some independent ones too, but it's always better to support your local bookshop if you have one.
Thank you. Professor, I've got to tell you, and my audience knows, when I talk about the books, I'll always say it's available everywhere and everywhere online. Please try to buy it as close to home as possible. And
right.
So, even now, I wasn't, when we had more independent bookstores, I wasn't asking people to go to, or suggesting to go to Barnes and Noble. Yet I've come to realize that those are local people working in there. Those are, Barnes and Noble puts stores in a community. They're paying rent, and it's your friends and neighbors or their kids or parents or whatever that are working in those stores. So even though it's not an independent bookstore per se, you can have it ordered in if it's not in stock at Barnes and Noble, and try to buy it there. I know a lot. Yeah.
And another idea, and I noticed what's written on your T-shirt. You go to your local library and ask them to order it. If you can't, then you don't have to pay for it. But then they now have a copy that other people can read too.
That's wonderful that you say that. I don't hear that from a lot of authors, and I get it that it's you want them to buy the book and ratings and rankings, etc. I understand that, but I love my library. We've got a wonderful, forgive me for, I don't want to go off on a wonderful library system in our community. And I appreciate, I have had authors on, Professor, that have not liked when I have said, please try to buy it at an independent bookseller. They want it purchased on Amazon because of the ratings, the rankings, whatever. And I'm respectful of that. Yet I love that you said locally and preferably at independent bookstores. Your website, helenbenedict.com. Tell us a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah, that'll have a lot more about the book, including some of the recent articles I've done, but it also gives you options for buying the book as well. And there's a little bio of Eyad. There you can see his picture as mine, and there's some videos of us, and then my earlier work too.
Right, yeah. The YouTube videos are great. Again, for this, and I would urge people to go to the website. Again, the piece in The Nation, if you don't mind, if you've got just a couple more minutes, tell us a little bit. Came out end of September.
Yeah.
Mind addressing?
So I don't know if everybody knows about this puppet, but this giant 12-foot high puppet of a Syrian refugee child who's known as Little Amal. And the puppeteers, the creator, have been taking her to walk through the streets of cities all over the world to bring attention to the plight of refugees. And she's looking, the story is that she's looking for her mother because they got separated when they fled Syria. And there's something, she's so huge, it takes somebody sits inside her chest working her face, because she opens and closes her eyes and she turns her head and she looks and she cranes. And then two people on the ground work her arms. I guess the man inside works her leg. Anyway, the point is that she moves like a real person. Her movements are so lifelike that all around me, I rushed out to Brooklyn, where she was walking through the streets right around the corner from my son's house. And my husband and I took our grandson, who's 7 years old, to see her. And he immediately believed in her as a real person, as do all children, even though she's a giant.
12 feet. Yeah, 12 feet tall.
12 feet tall.
Yeah. Okay. I had to make sure. Yes, 12 feet tall.
And she'll bend down and peer into windows of restaurants. And I mean, it's amazing what they have her do. And you can see her. She'll take presents from people with her hands. She'll, touch her heart. She just seems so real. And dances. If people play music, she'll dance. So he began to, like, as so many children do, just ask these wonderful questions. And one of them was, will she ever find her mother? Because what does a child care about more? But, was most afraid of being separated from his or her parents. And that's what triggered the idea of the essay. Like, what would it actually take for little Amal, to find her mother? In other words, how are we going to help the refugees of the world settle into new, safe lives better than we do now? Because at the moment, we're doing a very bad job for the most part.
It's incredible, Professor, incredible work that you do. I love the piece. I keep saying that, in The Nation, and very incredibly powerful book. I'm way too emotional today. Map of Hope and Sorrow, Stories of Refugees Trapped in Greece. We talked about the availability. Please try to buy as close to home as possible. And it is available everywhere online. Professor Helen Benedict, very powerful. And I'm grateful that you took time to talk with us this morning. It's
Thank
got to be very soul satisfying for you with the response.
you. I
And
hope so. Yeah, thank
yeah,
you. And I
it is.
do want one little note.
Oh, please.
There is the word hope in the title,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
for a reason. There's a lot of hope in this book, and there's a lot of hope I think readers will find. And the last chapter has a list of the ways we can all help, whether we're politicians or just
We can
ordinary
do.
people like us. There are ways we can all help, and that's in the back, so that you don't feel just left
Yeah.
worrying. Yeah.
A lot of source. Thank you so much for being on with me this morning. More importantly, thank you for the work that you do for our world.
Thank you. This was
Thank
lovely.
you.
Really
Thank
lovely.
you, Professor. Thank you so much. Folks, the book is available at